Now I would like to introduce the temporary database. You can find this icon here. You see it says temporary database. And this functionality, which I think is pretty novel, I haven't seen this in any other test tool, is something we came up with working with API tests. And as we've developed the API testing in Boozang, we've seen an increasing need that when you have one API request, you can have a consecutive request that is depending on data from a former request. So let's take an example where this would typically happen. I have a lot of features here, cucumber features, where let's say we take order management here, for instance, where I have a number of given condition that leads up, kind of does the data seed that creates the data that allows me to run the scenario. So in this case, it's a brewery platform. So it's given I am a brewer, I add a product, I set the inventory, which is the stock, and I set the price, and then I can order the product. In order to speed things up, we wanted to convert these given conditions to API tests so they're not done in the UI. So let's see what that would look like. We will take one of the modules here that I did convert here, inventory management. I am a brewer, and I call them just API. I add a product dash API. What we noticed was that, of course, given I am a brewer, this contains the login, and that will give you a user. The user is tied to a company, etc., etc., etc. So, of course, in my product request, I'm going to need data from a step before. So I've just created some helper tests to kind of illustrate this. And of course, this is fairly complex functionality. And I think as you start playing around with this, it will make much more sense. But one way I illustrate this is basically an API creation. I want to make sure that I can do find the company, which is basically the first condition, and then I want to create a new product. So let's see what this looks like. If I'm here, I can actually delete all this, which is the temporary database, which is in the local storage in the browser. So now this is clear, I don't see anything. And now what I want to do here is I want to play this step, and we're going to see what happens. I'm just going to run one iteration with this data. What's interesting here is really to be able to, without kind of creating these, of course you could create a carrier variable that says project user equals, or project company equals, and then carry it onwards. But I'll show you this is a slightly more elegant solution, and it works really well, especially in combination with the open API, where we have all the API requests really organized into modules in a very, very nice way. So let's open this. As you can see, we now have the user, the company, the container, the product, the subproduct, the inventory, and the sellable, which is all this stuff that I set, and I'm going to show you very soon how I set these. But in the meantime, let's look at this, right? If I want to understand how this data was set, I can troubleshoot it directly here. We're going to do the first thing. As you can see, we have an authentication request, and you can also look at the response. And if you go down the list here, you can see how the product is being called, and you can see the response. And remember, you can always double click here to open the tree completely. So let's look how this looks in practice. Well, first of all, okay, the temporary database is kind of populated automatically, and I'm going to show you how this is done. If I do look at the company call and I go into the API setting, and if I go to end script, you see this AI API add data, which is part of the default setup. This is the one that adds it into the temporary database. And then when I want to use it, I use something here in create product. I use this, and I'm going to show you here inside try. You're going to see that I'm using something here. Of course, it's just to debug, but what I would use is exist company ID, and it will automatically take the latest company ID. And if you want to know what was the latest company ID that was retrieved, imagine you want to have the latest one in case we store usually 10 company IDs. So you want to, if it was a test before that called something that got the company ID, in the response you want to catch the latest one, okay? So here you can see we open up the company IDs. You see there is a little star that indicates what would be used in an exist call. So we know here, and we can inspect in the data, and we can see here this is indeed Boozang Brewer AR, which is the right data that we should use in this case. So now you see a little bit on how you can store the things in the temporary database, and then how you can kind of link this together. And the way you would do this, I'm just going to go very quickly into it, but because of course this is pretty big functionality, is that if you go into mapping pages and you go into one of these fields, so you press settings and you go into fields, you're going to see that the company ID I set this exist company ID. So I basically map out all the modules and all the data that go into these modules for the API requests. But of course, this kind of AI view for API testing is a separate, bigger topic to talk about. But the new feature that we added specifically is this temporary database, which is super useful when working with more advanced end-to-end API tests.